Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. Today we have Nancy McLean from DalAC. And what should I share with you? My name is Georgia Lewis, and I'm the technical lead for the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. This is a OFCAF supported webinar, and OFCAF is a federal initiative that helps support farmers in 3 different beneficial management practices, including cover cropping, nitrogen management, and rotational grazing. So we had a great opportunity to check in with Nancy, and she was willing and able to do a webinar with us. So with that, Shane is going to introduce Nancy a bit further. And just for housekeeping, this will be recorded and then heading to our OFCAF library on the Perennia YouTube site. So that should be available within 6 weeks or so. What else? Recorded. We'll have questions at the end, so put your questions in the Q&A, and Shane and I can read those for Nancy. And I think that's it. So without further ado, I'll leave it over to you, Shane. Oh, and also I'll put my email in the chat. If you have any questions on the On-Farm Climate Action Fund, please do not hesitate to reach out. And that is all. I will see you after the webinar. There you go, Shane.
Hi, everyone. My name is... Oh, thanks, Georgia. Hi, everyone. My name is Shane Wood. I'm the forage specialist at Perennia. We're joined today by Nancy McLean. She's an associate professor at Dalhousie University Faculty of Agriculture. So Dr. McLean trained in agronomy and plant genetics at Macdonald campus of McGill University, where she received her bachelor's and master's degree, and before going to Dalhousie University and completing her PhD. She has worked at Nova Scotia Agricultural College or the Dalhousie Faculty of Agriculture since 1986, and she's taught courses including Genetics 1, Forages and Cover Crops, and Plant Breeding. Her research interests include forage crop management, cover crops, and plant-pollinator interactions. Next, and just for those that maybe don't remember the blurb on the talk today when you signed up, so Dr. Nancy McLean is going to talk to us about rotational grazing pasture management for a changing climate. Throughout Nancy's career, she's done work on forage breeding, pasture renovation, and management, as well as low-cost soil and crop improvement methods. Nancy's going to share her thoughts and experiences with managing multi-species swards under rotational grazing practices, ways to introduce legumes into pastures, and management strategies to maintain legumes in stands, as well as other things. Throughout this talk, we will hear how pasture biodiversity and legume content can have economic and soil and environmental health benefits. So with that, I'll leave it to Nancy.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you, Georgia. I'm really pleased to be sharing some information with everyone, and it was really fun to put thoughts together and to do some literature searching as well on this topic. I'm hoping you can see my title slide, and this slide has a picture of the field that I've spent more time with than any other field during my lifetime. This is a field that's it's in my yard. And this is a picture that I took about 30 years ago. I was leaving for work, and the heifers were on the field. And so I went in. There was a bit of fog, which is unusual for where I live in Pictou County. And it was a beautiful picture. So a beautiful scene. I went in, grabbed my camera, real camera, took the picture. But as I went out, they were interested. They wanted to come and see what I was doing. So when I meant to take the picture, the heifers weren't at the fence. But it's a really nice field. The field has not been tilled since I've been living there in 1989, and it hasn't been tilled long before that either. So it's it's very close to my heart, this field. Gift. Hopefully that's my second slide. So for this presentation, I was thinking about what is the wish list for rotational grazing for a changing climate. And on my wish list is high quality forage. So it has to be nutritious and has to be palatable. So you have to grow something that is going to be good for the animals and that they want to eat. It has to have good yield throughout the grazing season. It has to be resilient and persistent, so you don't have to replant it regularly. Net carbon capture, net zero greenhouse gas release, and minimal nitrate leaching. So what can be managed? Things that you can control. There are other things that you can't, but forage species is something that you can somewhat control. Which ones are you going to include and how many different species? pH and fertility, you definitely have control over, and the grazing management, which can make a huge difference, including how many paddocks and how long of a rest period will you provide. And these are steers that you can see part of a quadrat in the photo, and I was doing botanical composition in this pasture, and I was on my hands and knees, my head down, and didn't notice until the last minute that the animals were right there with me. This photo I think is from Graham Reed's farm a number of years ago. So for the forage species, how are they adapted? You have to match the forage species to your conditions, and you can't control your conditions really, especially the drainage. In the photo, most of Graham's fields had poor drainage, so that controlled the species that were grown on his pastures. So good versus poor. So alfalfa can tolerate well-drained soils, but clovers can tolerate poorly drained soils. And in Atlantic Canada, pastures are often on fields that have improper drainage. In terms of grasses, brome grasses and fescues can tolerate well-drained soils, while timothy and Kentucky bluegrass are more often associated with imperfect drainage. And then reed canary grass and orchard grass, they can tolerate a wide range of conditions. In terms of pasture renovation and adding legumes to pasture, I've tried a number of different legumes, forage legumes, and the only one that has worked reliably for me has been red clover, and literature supports that as well. So red clover, it makes sense that you can renovate with red clover because it has very good seedling vigor. And okay, my screen came back. It has very good seedling vigor, and it also has shade tolerance. So the seeds, if they can actually grow even if they're shaded. So that's why red clover works well. I've tried renovating with birdsfoot trefoil and with white clover, and I really haven't had much success. I could get the seeds to germinate, but then they just didn't establish, they didn't stay. And this photo, this was from Margaret Graves' master's research, where we were renovating pastures at the Brookside site. And there was virtually no red clover there when we started. And this shows sheep on very dense sward of red clover that had been no-till drilled into the mainly grass and weed stand that was there before. In terms of the legume species for quality, white clover has the highest protein of the legumes, and that's because it has no stems. White clover has stolons, so the stems are actually horizontal, they're at the soil surface. So the only forage from white clover that's available to animals are the leaves and the flowers, and they have very high protein. White clover also tolerates grazing best. The fact that it doesn't have any upright stems means that the growing points are protected. So white clover just makes sense to be the legume that's used in pastures. Birdsfoot trefoil protein, it's great. It's protected via tannins. So birdsfoot trefoil, you could have 100% animals grazing 100% trefoil and they wouldn't get any bloat because the protein is protected, so it's slower release from it. Red clover protein is also protected by a different mechanism, polyphenol oxidase. But again, it's a way of the protein not being highly soluble, which is a good thing. But forage legumes in general, they have huge benefits. I've been obsessed with forage legumes since my very first year of university. They pulled me in. So benefits of them, why I'm so excited about them, is they increase the soil nitrogen, which enhances the plant biomass, which increases soil organic carbon through the decaying plant tissue. So there's so many benefits of forage legumes. In terms of the grass species and their quality, generally in the immature stage, which is when the grasses should be grazed, frankly, there's very little difference in the quality among our common forage grasses when they're immature. But once they become headed, then there's quite dramatic differences in quality in terms of digestibility. So at heading, the meadow fescue has the highest digestibility, followed by brome grasses, timothy, and ryegrass, which are all about the same. And those are more digestible than tall fescue and orchard grass, which are usually more digestible than headed reed canary grass. But you have to think about the different grasses and how they can impact animal welfare, animal health. So if you have high potassium in your soil, there's a danger with orchard grass that you could get grass tetany or milk fever, because the orchard grass will take up as much potassium as it can, and that leads to less uptake of calcium and magnesium, and there can be animal problems there. Older reed canary grass, it can have toxic levels of alkaloids. The alkaloids are there to protect reed canary grass from pests, but those alkaloids can have negative impacts on animal response, animal gain, animal welfare, especially if plants are recovering following drought. Then you have extra high alkaloids. Newer varieties of reed canary grass have lower levels of alkaloids. But reed canary grass can stick around for a very, very long time. So the field that I showed you in my first slide, there's reed canary grass there that's been there probably 50 years. So it's that's an area where we tend not to harvest it. And older tall fescue varieties, they can also have a problem with health because they contain fungi, endophytic fungi that live inside of the plant. And those fungi produce alkaloids that help to protect the plant again from pests. But endophyte-free tall fescue varieties are safe. Okay. So those were all the species that are generally used in pastures, perennial pastures in Atlantic Canada. But how many should you plant? There's a great experiment that was done in Pennsylvania, at Penn State. And it was 9 years. And what they did was they took land that had been in alfalfa, then they killed the alfalfa and planted rye over winter. And then they killed the rye and planted an oat cover crop in the spring. And they had two different mixtures that they were comparing. A simple mixture with just 2 species, orchard grass and white clover. And then they had a more complex mixture with 5 species, which included the orchard grass and white clover, but also chicory, tall fescue, and alfalfa. And they limed, something that's really important. So before they planted the oat cover crop in the spring, they limed it with a dolomitic limestone, which is, contains magnesium as well as calcium. And they added about 10 kgs of nitrogen, about 35 kgs of P2O5 phosphorus, and 230 kgs of K2O potassium. So that was it's a 9-year study. They only limed and fertilized at the very first. They didn't lime or fertilize later over the 9 years. And they grazed these paddocks from mid-May to late October, 5 times per season. So the cattle were entered when there was at least 25 centimeters of growth, and they were removed at about 10 centimeters. So that's how they managed the paddock, which I would say is a really nice way to manage a rotationally grazed pasture. What they found was that with the 5 species, they had average yearly 31% higher yield than the 2. That was from the 5 species. That included, besides the orchard grass and white clover, it also included the chicory, alfalfa, and tall fescue. And there were fewer weeds in the 5 species mix. And the soil accumulation was significantly greater, more than 3 times greater carbon accumulation in soil. And they made the point that it's important to not just sample close to the soil surface, but they sampled to 100 centimeters. And they found that besides the carbon being more than 3 times higher in the 5 species, there was also carbon deeper in the soil from the 5 species mix. One thing that was very interesting in this experiment was that over time, the botanical composition became almost identical, even though they seeded 2 species in one treatment and 5 in the other. Over time, they ended up with almost identical percent composition: orchard grass, white clover, tall fescue, and Kentucky bluegrass. So it's really interesting. So the tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass were weeds in the 2 species mix, so they came in over time. The Kentucky bluegrass was also a weed in the 5 species mix as well. The alfalfa and chicory disappeared after 2 to 3 years. So they started off with 50% chicory, which was amazing in the 5 species mix, but after 2 years, it was pretty much all gone. And so even when towards the end of the experiment, they were growing almost exactly the same thing, there's still like about 30% higher yield in the plots that had been seeded to the 5 species. And the explanation was that it was positive feedback because of the higher soil carbon. So the fact that the 5 species added significantly more soil carbon, that extra soil carbon was increasing the yield potential of the soil, which is really I guess a really good reason for increasing your soil carbon is because it will increase your yields no matter what you're growing. This big sponge. So the next slide, how many, still on how many. There's Sanderson and others from 2007. This actually was from the same group at Penn State, but it was an earlier paper. So they stated that with their research, more species have higher yields, but almost half the species disappeared after 3 to 4 years. So no matter what you plant, you're going to end up with some Kentucky bluegrass for one thing, but you're going to lose some of the other species. And this paper also had a reference, somebody who was unpublished, who was an author of the paper. Anyway, they surveyed pastures in the northeastern United States, and I'm summarizing the results, but in over 60% of the pastures, they found a smaller number of species, where the most common species was Kentucky bluegrass by far. Almost nobody plants Kentucky bluegrass. It just shows up. It's not even native, but it is naturalized. So you can plant it, but it is going to show up. The next most abundant or highest cover was white clover. Sometimes you don't have to plant it, it will show up as well. So Kentucky bluegrass, white clover, then tall fescue, orchard grass, dandelions, timothy, plantains. I combined the narrow and the broadleaf plantain together into plantains, red clover, quackgrass, and curly dock. Curly dock at a very low percentage, but all of these were species were in more than 60% of the pastures in northeastern United States, which has similar conditions to here. Oh, and in the picture there is Kentucky bluegrass. Oh, this slide has a picture of one of my favorite species, red clover. So how many still? So some studies will find higher soil carbon associated with higher numbers of species, and some found no benefits. Sometimes there's differences too in how deep they collected the soil from. There's an interesting paper from the north of England. They found no relationship between soil carbon and number of species that were planted, but they found a significant difference wherever red clover was included in the mixture. So they found simply including red clover, didn't matter if it was just with one or a few or with a bigger number of species. The presence of red clover increased both soil carbon and nitrogen storage and improved soil structure. Really important characteristics for the soil to have. So we know that red clover won't last forever. It's going to die out after 3 or 4 years mostly, but just having it there provides a benefit that the benefits that it provided will have long-term impacts. I also went into a paper by Smith on it's some more general paper on soil carbon and Kyoto protocols, and it's a really interesting paper. But Smith suggested that you can increase the amount of soil carbon up to a point, but at some point you will reach equilibrium when the soil becomes saturated with carbon. However, according to another paper by Smith, it takes about 100 years in temperate climates to reach saturation. So most of the soils worldwide are not at carbon saturation points. And whenever you cause disturbance, loss of carbon from the soil is faster than the replenishment from management practices. So it's kind of cool. Okay, gotta say, pH and fertility. If you're going to do anything, soil test and amend your soil, especially for lime. So liming to pH 6.5, that ensures best availability of soil nutrients to plants. So that is the best thing. That would be the #1 thing on my list for trying to improve a forage stand, including a pasture. It's cheapest and can have the biggest bang for your buck. But then also make sure that you do a soil test. Oh, I made it right. Don't forget to identify your crop when you submit a soil test so that they'll give you the recommendations. Often if you don't say what your crop is, they'll just give you the levels and they won't actually give you recommendations for how much of anything you should add. Sometimes micronutrients can be limiting, so it's important to check those. Again, it would be a big bang for low cost. And to remember that pasture sward with at least, or any forage field with at least 30% legumes doesn't require nitrogen fertilizer. There's no point, certainly no environmental benefit and no yield benefit from adding nitrogen. And I think I'm pretty sure the photo on this slide is from John Dinesfeld's pasture a number of years ago. Okay, for grazing management, there's a fancy term called AMP, adaptive multi-paddock grazing management. Most of us would just call that rotational grazing, but the authors say that rotational grazing doesn't necessarily mean that it's adaptive, that the manager's not following things closely enough. So they argue that rotational grazing that's prescriptive, that says you're going to keep animals, you're going to move them so often all the time. So adaptive just means that you are watching and you're making changes depending on what's going on. So for the adaptive multi-paddock system, they encourage short stays to maintain soil cover, so you don't have any bare soil. If you do that, it allows adequate recovery periods. So it's managing for the plants. If you take care of the plants will take care of the animals. So you have to give them adequate recovery periods, and that will provide more soil carbon. More soil carbon will provide higher infiltration of water and higher water holding capacity. And that will provide greater photosynthesis, so more plant growth. More plant growth provides more biomass, and that provides greater evapotranspiration. And evapotranspiration is the water moving through the plants, and that has a cooling effect. So that helps to cool the earth, incredibly important in times of climate change. So if you do that combined with reduced tillage, so perennial pastures shouldn't have to till them up. Reduced inorganic fertilizers, so if you have animals on the pasture and you have legumes as well, then really it doesn't require, once you get things in place, then it shouldn't require many more inputs. And they also push reduced biocides, so not using herbicides, for example, or pesticides. And their conclusion is this will result in more profitable agriculture. So farmers will spend less and hopefully make more. This is an interesting photo. So I started adding photos to the slideshow yesterday, just mostly to be pretty, but not just because of that. This is a picture from the Swiss Alps that I was lucky enough to visit 2018, I believe. And so they're not allowed to add any amendments to their pastures when the cattle are in the mountains. It's sort of very low input. This is not what rotational grazing should look like. So the soil it's grazed far too hard. So rest period, there's no rest period here, I guess, except for winter when the cattle are taken down to the valleys. So ideally 4 to 6 weeks, I would say, for rest period. Some would say 6 weeks is better, but really it has to work for the farmer. So it's super important to give those plants a rest period so their roots can grow, so they can add more carbon to the soil, and then have that positive feedback. And of course, provide supplemental feed as required. So don't let the animals overgraze. If you don't have enough forage, then bring food to them. Greenhouse gases. I did some digging on this as well in the literature, and the carbon sequestered on pastures when you have multi-paddock grazing exceeds greenhouse gas emissions from the grazing animals. So they're burping and farting, the emissions, that they are less than what the plants are storing as carbon. So there should be reduced greenhouse gas emissions when you look at the balance. Oh, conclusion already. This is a picture from Cape John, which is a beautiful place to visit, and I've done botanical composition there for many years. So my conclusion based on what I've read and done is managing pastures for adapted, productive plants results in more resilient ecosystems. So they can add more carbon, they can provide more forage, they can have, so it's just a win-win situation. And that positive feedback of adding more carbon, which gives you more forage in return, and building the soil, replenishing the soil for carbon is, it's all good. And it seems like sometimes Mother Nature is going to do good things despite what the producers are doing. So for example, that Pennsylvania study where they ended up with a mixture that was better than what was planted. I think that's really a good news story. So for me, this is not a depressing story. We shouldn't be blaming animals for climate change. We can work with them to actually have beneficial impacts. That's all I've got, except for slides with my references and with links to those. So I'm guessing you don't want to look at those now, Shane. I can show them if you like, but no.
No, that's fine.
Okay. Academic
Thank you very
integrity.
much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Nancy. It was a really interesting talk. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A section or the chat to let us know if there's anything that you'd like to hear more about. In the meantime, though, I have some questions. So first, when you were talking about the increase in carbon sequestration in a 5-species mixture versus 2 species, is there did anything that you came across say there is a upper limit in terms of the amount of species that actually makes sense? Sorry, that makes sense. Is there an upper limit that you're no longer going to really sequester more carbon, like 7 species maxing it out? Do we know that?
Frankly, a lot of the research that I've read found no benefits. I think one of the biggest things that contribute to that carbon is the rooting depth. So even though chicory and alfalfa were gone after 2 to 3 years, they have deep roots. So that seemed to be, whereas the orchard grass and white clover, they both have shallow roots. Orchard grass has lots of fine roots, but they're not terribly deep. So I think rather than number of species, it's having plants with different rooting depths, frankly. So often they found the red clover as well, that experiment where they didn't find any benefit from increasing the number of species as long as you had red clover there, which has a decent depth of roots and good nitrogen fixation. And no, I didn't find any maximum number. And I guess short answer, no. If that helps.
No, it does help. That's kind of what I was thinking as well. It's about functionality of the different
Exactly.
species more than the number of species.
And working together, yes.
Yeah. We do have a question that just came through. So, do you have any experience with or thoughts on clover toxicity in late season grazing?
No, I don't. I'm just wondering about the type of toxicity. The only clover toxicity that I'm aware of is with Alsite clover. So Alsite clover is toxic to horses. And there's been some evidence that it's toxic to sometimes to sheep. But with the red clover and the white clover, no, I haven't come across anything about toxicity there. Um, the research, part of the research that I did with red clover and sheep was because there was a belief that red clover was toxic to sheep. But we published, well, Margaret Graves defended her master's thesis, and we published results that showed that sheep did very well on red clover. They actually did better on red clover than on other swards, and there was no toxicity and no reduced fertility. They actually gained better, both lambs and ewes after weaning.
Thank you. Another question we had is frost seeding worth the time and money? Should you frost seed red clover or any grasses? Like, what's the recommendation?
In my experience, red clover is the only thing that really makes a difference with frost seeding or even no-till drilling. The grasses don't seem to work. There's something about the red clover, I guess the size, the density of the seed, it works into that, it works down through the soil into a layer where it has ideal conditions for germinating. One thing that I've been told or I've noticed is that if you frost seed red clover just before the last snowstorm in March, then you'll have excellent results. I've had farmers tell me that they've done that. They frost seeded red clover. Then there was a big snowstorm and they thought, oh gosh, that was a big waste of time. But then they had excellent results, incredible results that looked just as good as no-till drilling. So no-till drilling works, but no-till drilling would be more expensive than frost seeding. So March is sort of the time when I've seen really good results with it. But I've done, like I said earlier, I've done botanical composition work at Cape John Pasture for a number of years, and they no-till drilled a number of different species, but the red clover is the one that seemed to work best. They tried, I think, some meadow fescue and some white clover. And then there's also, in my experience, I wouldn't recommending frost seeding anything except red clover. Although there is something called red clover sickness, which is just red clover to red clover. So it's not sickness with, doesn't have any impact on animals, but if you have a stand of red clover and it's starting to die out, if you try and seed red clover into the red clover, generally that doesn't work very well. It's just like with alfalfa. With alfalfa, it's called autotoxicity. So if you have an alfalfa stand and it's dying out, you should not try to seed alfalfa again. You should have a year's rest in between. I forget the
Thank you.
question.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it was about whether frost seeding was worth it.
Okay.
Have you ever tried to frost seed any grasses, or you've tried and red clover is still the best thing?
I've seen others try it, and usually my job is to go in and do botanical composition. Some people don't like to go and do botanical composition to identify grasses, especially. But yeah, I just haven't seen much benefit to it. Yeah. If
Okay.
somebody has, I'd love to hear from them and if they had good results from it.
Another question we had was, so this year was a drought year, so it's a good question for this and for planning for a future drought, which will likely happen. So is it better to share the pain across all paddocks or use a sacrifice pasture to allow others to cope and rest during a drought year? With the idea that you will have a plan to repair that damage on that sacrifice pasture later. Do you have a thought on that?
I do, yeah, no, that sounds like a really good idea. And if you have hay, if you've got something that you can feed them, if you could put some bales there, especially on that sacrifice pasture, and give the other paddocks a chance to rest, because that's super important.
Okay. Just 1 second.
I see a question about birds with trefoil, but
Well, so
no,
before we get to
that one, okay.
um, just in the meantime, could you show a slide or mention species best suited to wet conditions? I think you might have had something on different drainage.
I did, yeah. So I don't know, are my slides still up?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. Um, Conditions, right. Okay, so for actually what can tolerate really wet conditions is reed canary grass, not my favorite grass. The field that I showed at the first slide, we have a swamp there that's pretty much 100% reed canary grass. It's been there forever, pretty much. It doesn't get harvested. So, yeah, reed canary grass can tolerate both dry and wet conditions and everything in between. But Kentucky bluegrass and timothy can tolerate poorly drained soils. Orchard grass can tolerate a wide range, although it will sometimes winter kill on wet soils. But in my experience, orchard grass, even when it is winter killed, there's resurrection. It comes back from the dead. I don't know how, but that's what I've seen. I've seen orchard grass that I'm sure was dead, and I give it a couple months and it's coming back. So, yeah, orchard grass, I would give it a try too.
So yes, birds with trefoil. Birds with trefoil versus red clover for frost seeding. With the understanding that trefoil seed is more expensive than red clover. Do you have any, yeah, thoughts?
I do have thoughts. Birds with trefoil is what I did my master's research on. Red clover is what I did my PhD research on. So I love them both. I dearly love them. At home, I have a patch, a really thick patch of birds with trefoil that I transplanted by hand into one of my garden beds. It's beautiful. All those wonderful yellow flowers. I love it. The bees love it. So I love birds with trefoil. I would not waste my time trying to frost seed it. Birds with trefoil does very well. Where I actually hand seeded it, it was from another place on our farm. Well, on the yard where I live, frankly. So there's been birds with trefoil there for a long, long, long time, but it's not very productive. It's dry and it's like no fertility there, whatever, but it still lives. So I dug out little plants and I transplanted them. But I would, if the soil is good, birds with trefoil is not going to, it's not going to stay really. Birds with trefoil does really well where it was found in New York State, way back in the 40s, I think, was on wasteland. It was on where they had cleaned out boats. It was on sides of river. Anyway, where there's no fertility, peach sucks. So it'll grow really well where nothing else can grow. But otherwise, yeah, I wouldn't frost seed it at all. I love it, but it would be a waste of time. The red clover is cheaper and it'll work. So birds with trefoil is a wimp. It can't compete. So it does well where nothing else will grow. Sorry, I love it, but that's what I know about it.
I was gonna ask, is it a competition thing? And then you mentioned that at the end. Yes, it doesn't compete very well.
It's not aggressive at all. No.
In our Q&A section, so we have a question that came in. So if you have a soil test that is adequate or high in macronutrients, but could benefit from some micronutrients like boron or sulfur as examples, what's the best way to apply those without having distribution issues?
Ooh, that's a
David?
tough thing. And sulfur is a macronutrient, actually. So, yeah, it's with the macros, I believe. I'm not a soil
Well, even, I
scientist.
guess it's more just
Doesn't
the
matter.
small quantities that you do
True.
need, right?
True. Yeah, yeah. How to, oh, it's better to ask somebody else about that. I know there's information about that. And boron as well. It's diluted, but ask your local advisor is what I would say. I'm not the best person to ask about that.
Yeah, I'd have to look into it myself a little bit, but typically you do want to have boron added to
Something
another
else.
larger nutrient so it can be distributed more easily, which I think the person is aware of
Yeah.
based off the question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, trying to go back and forth here. I think you did answer this, Nancy, but I don't know if you just want to go over it again. So if you did put red clover, frosty red clover into a stand, how long should you expect it to last?
It depends on the management too. So I've been to pastures and hayfields where red clover has been there for more than 5 years. But in those places, it was not intensively managed. But on the conservative side, I would say that you get after the year of establishment, you'll get 2 good years and then it'll start to disappear. It's just the way the plant grows. So it has internal breakdown of the crown. So as that crown of the plant gets bigger and bigger, it just hollows out, and then there's insects and diseases that become associated with it. So I tried, that was one of my tasks in my employment here when I was hired as a research associate. But I just came to the I failed. I failed. I can't make it live forever. And I think it's just because, well, I think it's just because some plants have limited lifespans and red clover does. So I suppose actually in those fields where it has persisted, I think there's been some reseeding, even though there is red clover sickness. That's a thing. If you're only making one cut of hay a year and it's in July when you're on vacation from your other job, then in those cases, I've seen red clover last longer than 3 years.
I wonder if there's also the buildup of soil-borne diseases that, do happen and have an impact on roots and root strength.
Yeah, there definitely could be, but it seems to be a secondary
Interesting.
factor that they come in after the internal breakdown starts.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Um, s- so we have another question. So in this person's experience, when they've tried to frosty red clover into a well-established grass sward, they haven't had very good results. So they're wondering if there's any practical or economic benefits or reasons to do no-till renovation, and potentially using something like a wild game plot seeder versus a more expensive 120,000 no-till drill. Before you get into it, and maybe this will help answer it, I would say that through off-calf, there are a lot more no-tilled seeders and no-till drills that are out in Nova Scotia. Maybe the answer is, instead of buying the no-till drill, is to see if you could rent one or borrow one from a neighbor or somebody who's close by. And maybe that would be one way to cut down the cost on it. Outside of that, Nancy, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
So again, sorry, was this for red clover or something else? The very
It
first.
is for trying to establish red clover
Okay.
into an established grass stand,
Right.
using
Okay.
a no-till drill.
Yep, I've done that, and that's for the work that we did at Brookside. We used the no-till drill that was kept at Perennia. It was purchased maybe through Soil and Crop. I don't think it's there anymore. It might have died by now, or is it still around? Still around?
We still have it.
Oh,
Yep.
great. Yeah. So I've used that at a number of different places and for cover crops as well as for pasture renovation. And I thought it was fabulous. It was really a fair price to rent it, and you could pull it behind a truck. So yeah, I think it's fabulous. I had really good success. I used it once, I think it was on my wedding anniversary, June the 2nd. So what we did was we went in and we no-till drilled red clover, birdswitch trefoil, and white clover in different spots. And then as soon as we had seeded it, the next day we put cattle in to graze those paddocks to get rid of some of the competition from the existing pasture plants, grasses mainly, and had excellent results. So I think no-till drilling is a higher success rate than frost seeding. But sometimes frost seeding is just as good.
Do you think you would have had the same success if you hadn't grazed it down afterwards?
I don't know because it just made sense to me to do that. So, and I had the animals there for that. Oh, they were there anyway, so they were going to be grazing it. And this was, I think what was really important though was beforehand, actually Rob Gordon gave some money for lime. So we made sure that the pH of the soil was good. But even with that, the white clover and the birdswitch trefoil didn't do nearly as well, even the white clover. So trefoil, I had really good germination, and just then it just disappeared. Couldn't compete. But red clover, excellent.
There's a really good question in the Q&A, but I'd be curious at your thoughts. So this person has noticed that in the last several years that we don't regularly get -5-degree weather in the fall in correlation with a 6-week or so rest for the critical fall rest period. Do you think with the changing temperatures, the timing of the critical rest period has shifted?
Definitely. Yeah.
Have they changed dramatically, or is it a few days, or?
But I guess the thing is, so I think of critical fall harvest period in terms of alfalfa. That's where my mind normally goes for that. But I don't think about it normally for pastures. But that's all about, so the critical fall harvest period is about managing winter kill. So making sure that the plants don't use their root reserves for regrowth instead of for preparing for the winter. So definitely, I think it used to be like the last week of August, and I think it definitely could be moved. But when I'm teaching, I just tell students that if you need the feed, then you're going to cut it. If it's with alfalfa and you're going to rotate that to corn anyway, then who cares? You're going to want to kill it anyway. So it all really depends on the situation. I think it's moved, but what you do with that information depends on your circumstances. But
I
really
agree.
important from going back to let the plants rest, including during the growing season. Once you're had that killing frost, then it doesn't matter if you remove the top growth or not, because most of where the carbon is coming from is the roots. It's not from the top growth, although the top growth will support the root growth.
Georgia, I don't know if there's anything else.
You can do a good job
Um,
going back and forth.
I don't know if there's a good answer for this one, Nancy. Without getting more information, it's pretty theoretical. But what's the ratio of cattle to grazing area? For example, if you had a herd of 25 cows and 25 calves, how large should each paddock be? I think that's very situation dependent in my head, but I don't know if you have a different thought.
Right. The rule of thumb has been one animal unit is one acre. It's American, but so so an animal unit is based on like 1,000-pound cow or animal. So that you would need 1 acre for every cow that size. If it was more like a heifer or steer, it's like about 0.6. And then but that as they grow, it gets bigger. So yeah, rule of thumb is 1 acre per animal over the season. And that is quite conservative, frankly, because I've gotten away with much higher than gotten away. We've been successful with more than that. Um, without having any deterioration of pasture in some of the research that I've done. So yeah, the 1 acre, it's for more dryland farming. So in Atlantic Canada, we have better yields. We have better species and better yields, even in a year like this. Um, so yeah, that's a roundabout number.
Yeah, that's the number that I've typically heard as well, just to echo what you're saying. And after that, it really is situation dependent, soil fertility, forage species that are there, and so on.
Mhm.
Have you addressed some of the comments about the orchard grass in the chat, Shane? We have some from Lloyd and Susan here. Lloyd was just saying, I have only kept orchard grass in one paddock. I can't seem to manage any more properly. It matures so quickly, making orchard grass border on being a weed.
Oh yeah. Yeah, orchard grass. So the field in my very first slide, that's mostly orchard grass. So orchard grass is, and Bruce Coleman's published a paper a long time ago on how if you grow mixtures of grasses, you'll end up with orchard grass. Uh, it's the one that will outcompete. So Timothy will disappear when it has any competition, and brome grass will overtake Timothy, but orchard grass will overtake both of them. So it will, yeah, it will. But it's fabulous on regrowth. It's amazing how fast it regrows. You can almost watch it growing faster than anything else. So that's fabulous. But it is early to go to head. In usually the last week in May, it will be headed. So if you get the animals on it, and I would say clipping it, but once it's only going to head in that late May, early June time period. After that, all the regrowth is just leaves. So it won't produce any stems. The only perennial forage grass that we grow that will produce some heads on regrowth is Timothy. The other ones only produce leaves after that May, June time. So I would say if you could cut it, once it's puts heads on it, then clipping it or cutting it, and then it should be good for pasture for the rest of the season. I can't think of anything. Tall fescue is pretty good at regrowth too, but frankly, the fastest regrowth that I've seen is orchard grass, followed by tall fescue. So I think
And
it's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what Susan's saying here. She says, we have one field of orchard grass and having the same issue with making the first cut of it, but loves this time of year for grazing. Yeah, late in the fall, which kind of that aligns with what you're saying there. Susan has another comment here. I have grazed sheep on alfalfa after it turned brown in November with success. We don't have any more, but I do graze our silage fields in the fall, and I've noticed things are quite green way into November and December now.
Yeah, I'm walking in fields almost every day with the dog. And yeah, they're still fairly green, although the alfalfa in our fields looks really awful right now. It's just like those sticks and yeah, it's not beautiful and green, at least not in the field at home now.
Do you, this is another question of mine, and maybe some other people will have the thoughts, or maybe some other people have the same question too. So with the areas in the province where we have had severe drought this year, and we haven't had much chance for regrowth because of the lack of rain, do you expect any knock-on effects next spring for its regrowth will we get the same production that we've had in the past? Is there a chance maybe it won't be as strong? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, it really depends so for established pastures, I don't anticipate a huge negative impact going forward. I mean, obviously we had reduced yields in the summer, but frankly, here's the thing. Once you get the carbon level up in the soil, for example, my vegetable garden. I'm as really good over time. I've been able to increase the carbon in the soil, and I didn't water my vegetable garden except for my tomato transplants when they went in. I didn't water it all season, and I had fabulous yields of corn and huge sunflowers and great vegetables. So it's about resiliency. So once you get the soil carbon levels up, then the plants become resilient. They're able to tolerate wetter conditions and drier conditions because the soil is supporting them. So it's got that ability to still keep moisture. I was shocked with my vegetable garden, but it went into a hayfield originally, several years ago, and it's received hay mulch, and but I think that's really that's the whole story here. So if we can manage the plants, I know people are livestock producers, but really you have to think about the plants. And I like that idea about sacrificing one paddock while letting the others get their rest and do their thing. So I think that's where we have to start thinking about the plants. I think I'm preaching to those who are already
Already
already.
sold.
Yeah. But we have dairy cattle at home, and I love dairy cattle. But really, the best thing we can do for them is to take care of our plants and let the plants have rest when they need. So I'm kind of answered your question, maybe. I'm feeling positive about, unless it's soil that's been really degraded. So I've been to some pastures where they never produce very much, and it's because the plants have never had a chance to grow more than maybe 10 centimeters tall ever. So what you see at the top of a plant, that gives an idea about how much is below. So if there's never much top growth, you're never going to have much root growth. And it's the roots that you need that's what's contributing to the carbon in the soil, giving that sponge that holds nutrients and moisture and gives them up too.
Yep, totally agree. It's definitely going to be, it might be an issue for some fields that have not had much in the way of fertility, or they have very low pH. Sorry, it's very acidic soils.
Yeah.
Those might be of more concern. And so,
So just
now,
lime them for goodness sakes. Yeah, it's not hugely expensive to lime, but the benefits it'll give you are way, way more than what it costs to lime.
yeah, and to find out what you need to lime, you do need to soil test. And for those that don't know, the NSDA offices all do have soil probes that you can borrow from those offices. If you get in touch with your local NSDA staff, they'd be able to help you out with that.
Super.
That's probably a great place to end it. Some great notes there. Thank you, Nancy, so much for taking the time to be with us today. And Carrie just mentions we will ship samples. So if you want to borrow the probe, get some samples, take them to your local office, they will ship them to the lab. But yeah, pretty good deal. So thank you very much, Nancy, for joining us today, and we will have this recorded on within a few weeks and have it on our off-calf library. Thank you, Shane, for moderating. That was awesome. And yeah, I think that's all.
Thanks for the opportunity.